Hey, welcome back to A Mission Focused Life. I'm Tanner Payton, the pastor of Word of Life Church in Rock Island, Illinois. With me is the man himself, Tim Oloffson, Executive Director of Another Child Foundation and a Mission Network. Tim, how are you?
It is great to be with you again, Pastor.
Yeah.
It's just fun. When we started talking about doing this podcast, and just people stay tuned in, because what we're going to be talking about today is going to be very important, and you'll want to. So the first 4 minutes, just stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy what we have today, and just good to be with you, Tanner.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, today we're going to be talking about sharing your personal testimony. I don't know that there is anything more important for us to learn as servants of the kingdom than how to share the gospel and how it has affected us personally. What do you think, Tim?
No, definitely, because when you're trying to share the gospel, if you're doing it more as telling people what to do, it's, especially to someone who might be apprehensive, you don't know them that well, that can be a turn off to many people.
Sure.
But if you just simply share what God has done in your life, then that just opens up a conversation. They're going to ask questions about that. So I know we're going to get into that deeper, but it's really just about sharing what God has done for you. It's hugely important in a mission field.
Absolutely. Well, in the book of Revelation, it actually says that we overcome Satan by two things: by the blood of Jesus and the word of our testimony. So let's break that word down for just a minute. What is a testimony? Well, a testimony is simply you telling others what you have personally experienced. So our testimony in the context of our Christian faith is, what have we experienced in and with Jesus? How has he affected our lives? Tim, I know you have a powerful testimony. I know that my testimony has been used to explain Jesus to many people. What would you say is probably some of the biggest obstacles to people being able to share their testimony effectively?
Well, not being prepared, I think.
Yeah.
You got to be prepared, so you got to think about this. And just, I think it's just the preparation of what happens if someone asks you, well, you tell me about this guy, but what's he done for you? You better have a story. You better have that elevator pitch or something that's going to be able to share that. So I think being prepared to share your story is probably the most important thing. And then understanding that your story is going to be, it's a process. It's just changing, because my testimony 5 years ago is not nearly the same as it is today. Sure. It deepens. It has more experiences, more personal items that come into your life, and you just be able to share that because your testimony, I guess maybe this is, you can answer this question. It doesn't have to be the same testimony to each person. I mean, you got to have it tailored almost towards the person you're speaking to. Because if I had my one set testimony and I'm talking to a 10-year-old girl one time, and the next time it's a 58-year-old man, the testimonies have got to be different. So Absolutely. Your experiences, but it's,
Oh, I agree with that 100%. And I really think that what's important is we understand that you don't have to just talk forever. You know, sometimes something short and sweet can be hard to beat, right? And so being able to keep things succinct and to the point, not rabbit trailing. Too many details often ruin a story for people, because they just say, oh my gosh, I'm over listening about this. Like, let's move on. Like, what else happened? So I think those are two important things. I personally have my testimony in 3 different forms. And then, like you said, I can tailor that to whoever I'm talking to in the moment. So I like to have a short one, basically being able to tell my testimony in 2 to 3 minutes. And then a longer version of maybe 12 to 15 minutes, depending on the audience and how long of a time we have to talk. And then I have the longer version that might take me 40, 45 minutes if the person is really engaged and wanting to hear more and if they have questions. And so I think being able to know which one of those to pull out in the moment is incredibly important.
And I think it's important that we also don't overwhelm people with all the stories, because you got to make it relatable, correct? I mean, it's got to be something that is relatable to somebody, because if you go in and you have this horrible story, a background of abuse or whatever's in your family, and you've overcome that might not connect with somebody. So you need to have something that's relatable, I would say.
Well, and that brings us into the next part of this. So a really important thing to understand when sharing your testimony is a testimony is really 3 parts. All right? So the first part is, who were you before Jesus? Who were you before Jesus? And you have to be able to tell that story well. And Tim, you just hit it really well on the head. You know, some people have these gory, horrific, difficult testimonies, you know, that they were raised under abuse, you know, they had horrible things happen to them, everybody died. I mean, it's like Oliver Twist on steroids, right? I mean, they just had it rough. And then other people were kind of raised like me, just kind of the all-American kid, didn't really have a lot of tragic things. My parents didn't like each other, they got divorced, you know, I moved around a little bit with step-parents and step-siblings, but for the most part, had a pretty decent average quality of life. You know, nothing horrific happened except for my own dumb decisions. So I think one of the things that we have to be careful about is don't try to be somebody that you're not, and don't buy into the lie that just because your testimony isn't horrible about everything bad that could have ever happened, that it can't speak to somebody else's heart, right? I can minister with my testimony to a drug addict. I can minister with my testimony to an ex-gang member or an ex-prostitute or somebody that's had horrific abuse, because ultimately it's Jesus that saves. Now, the other thing I'm not going to try to do is try to jump into their life and explain to them how they should feel about things, because that's not going to go over well either.
No. One of the things I try to do whenever I'm given the opportunity to speak in front of the churches now is I'm thinking about the men out there who are very similar to me. Maybe grew up in the church straight away in your 20s and maybe in your 30s, and suddenly you got a family, your eyes are off yourself a little bit more and more onto your family, and you find yourself maybe going to church, but just really not connected to the church. You're letting the ladies at church teach your kids, you know, in Sunday school and stuff, and your role as a man has kind of diminished as far as the spiritual development of your children. So I try to speak to them because that's an experience that I had, and I felt myself just not being able to do that. I remember my wife was in a situation where her dad had passed away, and spiritually I had nothing to offer her. And it was at that moment I realized that I'm doing her a disservice and other people and myself a disservice by not having that personal connection with God. Even though I was going to church, I was missing some obstacles, and I wanted to speak to the men when I speak to the churches, to those men, because there's men just like that, just like myself, who are sitting out there in those pews looking for opportunities to serve, and they can overcome some of those obstacles that I was dealing with.
Absolutely. The second part of your testimony that you want to be able to share after who were you before Jesus is, how did you come to know Jesus? You know, that's the climax of the story. That's the part that really probably matters the most, because people want to understand what was the process, what was the sequence of events that you had to go through personally to be able to get to that place where you were able to open up and not only believe but have faith in Christ. So, Tim, what are some of the elements of that you think are important to share?
Trust. Trust has got to be a huge part of our development, because if we're not trusting, that's a good question. I'm struggling with this, internalizing this, and it really comes down to trusting what God is calling you to do. That He is part of your life, that He is part of your connection, and if you can just trust what He is telling you, whether it's through Scripture or through prayer, whatever that is, I don't know if that quite answers your question or not, but the trust is the word that popped in my mind when you asked me the question.
Well, you know, for me, what led me to that place of trust was I had to come to the end of myself. And there were a sequence of events the summer I turned 17 that led me to the end of myself. You know, and I often share this with our students here at the church, that it wasn't a big thing. It wasn't like I had a drug overdose or lost somebody or everything in my world fell apart. It was just that some relationships in my life got strained or confused, and I found myself questioning what I was doing. Started questioning myself, trying to figure out my identity. And it did leave me with a little bit of a hole inside, and I knew that the things that I had been trying to fill that hole with were not working. Right. And so it just left me with an openness, and I ended up starting going to church with a buddy of mine, And then trying to impress a girl, I started going to church with her, and I heard Jesus presented in a way that I never had before, and then all of a sudden, bam, I knew that I was hooked. I knew that I had to have more, and I knew that what I was hearing was real, and that it was true, and that it was going to give me something that was solid, that was going to have substance to it, and I was all in.
Yeah. So I said sometimes while it's developing that personal relationship, obviously it's important. We all need to do that, but it's getting past that selfishness of just getting our eyes off ourselves. So at times I tell a story of I was addicted, and I go through this story of how I was even integrating my family into this addiction. I was offering it to my children, and they're probably thinking horrible things, but it was selfishness. It was this life of the American dream where you can go out and you can get everything you want. You can have the nicest cars and boats and motorcycles and all that. So it was a selfishness, this addiction to myself that I was integrating into my family. And so it wasn't substance abuse or anything like that. The addiction was to myself, my own greed, my own needs. And you need to get past that and get your eyes off of that personal relationship so you can serve others. And it kind of gets back to that mission-focused life that we like to talk about here. It's developing that personal relationship. So it is about you, but it's about you to the point to where you can help others.
Yeah.
And until you get to that point, you can't help others if you're selfish.
That's right.
So
well, and that leads us right into the third aspect of your testimony is how have you changed since Jesus came in? And that's an important question because it does a couple of things. Number one, it makes us look at our life and question if we have changed, because if we haven't, something, we may not be as into Jesus as what we like to think that we are. But the second thing that it does is it really helps us to understand just how powerful God is as we begin to look at and see all the areas of our lives that have begun to be changed and transformed by the power of Christ.
Yeah. One of the stories one of the first things that I saw that I could tell people had noticed that I had changed is I was in a work environment that really wasn't Christ-like at all. It was a manufacturing facility, and there was a lot of cuss words and some other stories, bad jokes and stuff like that. And then I would notice all of a sudden people would start apologizing to me for using foul language or to tell an inappropriate joke, and without even me having to even say anything. It was just they knew who I was, they knew who I was becoming, and suddenly they were apologizing, so they knew who I was and what I believed in. And so that was the first indication to me that outwardly, without even telling people, that things were changing.
Absolutely. I remember for me, I was a Christian for about 3 years, and a friend of mine, his dad, we were really good friends growing up during some of my rougher teenage years. I was never a really rebellious kid, but I did what a lot of other kids did, and his dad knew exactly what I was doing. And so when I first started going to church, he just kind of nodded at me and was glad that I was going. But about 3 years in, he walked up to me one day and he goes, I guess this is real. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, for 3 years, I was convinced that this was just something that you were doing for attention or, trying to get a girl or whatever. He's like, but I've realized that this really is who you are now. And it was both funny and humbling to me, but it was also one of the greatest compliments that anybody ever gave me. That realization that this really was who I had become. And that's the part of our testimony that becomes so powerful to other people, is when they can get this picture. Because if somebody knew me now, I've been a Christian for 20 years of my life at this point. If somebody would have known me as a teenager, they don't have that memory. Most of the people don't remember who I was then. I've been a Christian longer than I haven't been a Christian at this point. And a lot of people are that way. We used to have an elder in our church. His name was Ed. Great man. Loved the Lord. Been a Christian for like 25 years. But man, the 45 years he lived before that, he was not a nice guy at all. It was just a complete opposite. And so when he would get up and talk about who he used to be, people would just say, there's no way you were that guy. There's no way you were that person. And I love those stories because that's the point where people get to go, okay, there's something real about this.
Yeah. I have a high school friend that I meet occasionally. He lives over in Cambridge, Illinois, and him and I were a little bit separated in years, but we live very similar lifestyles. we really weren't bad kids, but we would do things in high school that we probably shouldn't have done. Very sports oriented, very girl oriented, and partied a little bit and did some things like that. And we kind of get together. He's very strong Christian now. And we look back and thinking, can you believe that you and I, Jim, are now living this life when you look back at what we were doing in high school? It's just crazy how God has used us in some amazing ways.
Yeah. Well, last time when we were talking about short-term missions, I brought up a friend of mine who has gone on mission trips all over the world. He's currently serving in the Himalayas. And when I met this guy in college, this is one of the most squeaky clean individuals I'd ever met, and I'm convinced at this time in his life, he's 33 years old, he's never cussed one time in his whole life. Raised in a great Christian home, pastor's kid, wasn't the type of PK that rebelled, was the type of PK that just really sold out to Jesus and has always lived that way.
Yeah.
And, I heard him share his testimony one time, and I thought, what's this guy, this is going to be the shortest testimony in the world, right? Hey, I was born, I got saved at 2 years old, I stole a bottle from another kid in the nursery, and I realized I needed to repent. What do you got to share here? And he got up, and he spoke to a group of students for about 40 minutes. And what he did was he said to them, listen, I want to show you all the things that God saved me from and protected me from. And so he gave this amazing picture of what it can be like to grow up as a Christian and not have to deal with the baggage of sexual immorality, not have to deal with the baggage of addiction, not have to deal with the baggage of living selfishly, not have to deal with the baggage of being a liar, a cheat, or whatever it is that somebody's testimony usually has in it. And by the time he was done, I was going, man, I wish that could have been my story. And I want that to be the story of my children. And I think so many times Christians that have been Christians most of their lives sell themselves short on, listen, you have an amazing testimony because you can share with people what God can protect them from moving forward.
Yeah. I think what happened for me personally was I was introduced to the church when we went to Sunday school, we went to the summer Bible school and things like that. So I was aware. So I had this foundation. I understood who God was, who Jesus was, what he did for us. But it wasn't strong enough to keep me from dabbling in some of those things. So I dabbled into alcohol and some other behaviors. But I think God did protect me from those things because I did have that mustard seed of faith that was developed in me at an early age. So I was able to walk into the darkness a little bit, but I think he protected me from going too far because he knew where my heart was. And that was established in those early church years of, even though I didn't even realize it, I knew right from wrong. And I think that was important for me, that just having that introduction, even if it was just through Sunday school, of who Jesus was. And I think it did. I think it protected me from, because I had opportunities. To go off the deep end. A lot of my friends did, but for some reason, I never took that next step into addictive behaviors. And I'm blessed by that, but I think it was because of the foundation that I had at an early age.
I think we need more blue-collar testimonies, more just everyday normal folks, like more soccer moms coming in and saying how Jesus has helped them to, live their lives and care for their husbands and their kids and be fulfilled in their everyday life and not get caught up in the desperate housewives, mentality, or, more men coming in who get dirty every day for a living, and they work 50, 60 hours a week, but they make sure to love their wives, take care of their kids, and serve in the church, and they're good people. They're just living normal, everyday lives. I think we need more of those testimonies, more of those stories.
So how does someone who's out there watching today, who maybe doesn't feel they have a testimony, maybe hasn't really started the walk in faith that they need, how do you suggest to them that they get plugged in so that in a short period of time they could have their own testimony?
Sure. Well, I think a good question for somebody who maybe isn't walking with the Lord or hasn't been walking with the Lord for a long time is to be able to stop and ask the question, okay, what are the things in my life right now that I really wish weren't there? What are the things in my life that I regret up to this point? What are the things that I kind of look back on and I have a little bit of guilt, have a little bit of shame? And then they realize that all of those things can be washed away in a moment by asking Jesus to save them and to forgive them and to set them free. And at that moment, now they do have a testimony. Because now they can tell people, listen, I was feeling this way. I was ashamed of this. I looked back on this with regret, and this area of my life was holding me back. But now I've learned to trust in Jesus. And I'm not perfect yet. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I'm moving forward.
Yeah. So that 5, 10, 20 years of living probably an unproductive, unchristian life, that can be overcome much more quickly.
In a moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's important for people to know, because once you give it over, once you give it up and ask God to actively work in your life, those things can, there's still going to be struggles, there's no doubt. I mean, those things don't go away, but a lot of the guilt, a lot of the other things can quickly disappear.
Well, and I think it's important that we realize we are all walking billboards for something or someone. I'm a billboard for the world, I'm a billboard for myself, or I'm a billboard for Jesus.
Yeah.
And I got to make that determination of who I want to be advertising for.
That's good. I like that. I never thought of that. You always bring up cool analogies.
Well, thank you.
So I'm thinking to myself,
I read a lot of books from good authors.
So if I'm driving down the road and I see the Tim Oloffson billboard, what's it going to have on it?
Yeah.
Now that would be, I'll have to think about that one.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's something positive, I would think it would be. But
Oh, I can think of all kinds of good stuff to put on there.
for a while, though, it probably would have been the sports-oriented,
Sure.
selfish golfer that doesn't really care if people sees it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Mine would have definitely just been a big circle of me looking in a mirror, like, look at me, I love me, that type of thing.
yeah,
Well, hey, thank you all so much for joining us this week. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope you remember what Tim said just a minute ago. You have a story, and you have a story that's worth hearing because Jesus is writing it. Jesus is the author and the perfecter of our faith. And what he has started, he will finish well if we let him. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Join us next Thursday for A Mission Focused Life.